Morning. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches, Kiddushin, Daf Yud Aleph, and we're starting about 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page with the words Ravina Amar. Yesterday, toward the top of the page, we learned about an interesting dialogue that needed a little bit of explanation, which was the dialogue between Yochanan ben Bagbag and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira of Netzivin. And they were talking about a case scenario of an Arusa Bas Yisrael who was Ocheles Betruma. And there were a couple of different ways to understand that. So now let's talk about Ravina's approach to how to understand this dialogue between Rabbi Yochanan ben Bagbag and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. The Gemara says, Ravina Amar, Mida Oraisa, everyone agrees on a Torah level, Mifshat Pshitale de Achla. Everyone agrees, Pashat, that an Arusa Bas Yisrael, who's she's engaged halachically to a Kohen, she's allowed to eat Truma. Umi de Rabbanan Hu de Shalachle. The whole letter that was sent from Rabbi Yehuda was sent that Yochanan ben Bagbag sent to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was only dealing with Dinei Derabanan. This was the question. Shamati alecha, Yochanan ben Bagbag says, I heard about you, Sha'ata Omer, that you hold Arusa Bas Yisrael Locheles Betruma, V'lo Chayshes L'Simfon. This is a new introductory word that we haven't really seen, I don't think, ever in Shas or Simphon. I don't think we've ever seen it. And the word Simphon over here is translated in Rashi. Take a look at Rashi, about 12 lines or so from the bottom, simphon. A simphon is basically a negative, conflicting something that interrupts what's happening. Rashi says, Kol davar hamivatel davar, anything that interrupts another thing. Karui simphon shalo, it's its counterpart. Kigon, shover, have a simphon shel shtar. If I have a receipt, that can combat your claim that I owe you money. This just happened to me with a company. Wait, hold on one second. You have our product? Yes, I do. Here's our receipt, right? So that's a simphon. So if we go back in the Gemara, what is our simphon over here? So the Gemara says that he was asking him, Shamati, that you say in Arusa Bas Yisrael Zocheles Petruma V'lo Chayshes L'Simphon, that nothing negative will ever happen. Maybe their Kiddushin will fall apart. How is she eating Truma right now? And Shalach Lei, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira writes back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Bagbag and says, Ve'ata, Iyata Omer Kein. You don't agree with me? I thought you were a Talmud Chacham. Muchzakani bach she'ata baki b'chedrei Torah. I thought you knew the inner workings of Torah. Why are you not following the flow here? Why? Lidrosh b'kal v'chomer Iyata yodea. You don't know how to make a kal v'chomer. And says the Gemara, what would the kal v'chomer have been? In order to remove our concerns of simphon, the fact that she might have been in Arusa, and maybe the marriage will, the betrothal marriage will fall apart, and then we have a woman who is then eating truma retroactively when she wasn't even in Arusa, nothing. 5 lines from the bottom. So says the Gemara, what's this vara? Uma shivcha kenanis she'ein biyasa ma'achilasa betruma. A shivcha kenanis, the fact that the Kohen is intimate with her has no bearing on her achilas truma. She's a shivcha kananis. That's not how you get truma. But kaspa ma'achilasa betruma. But money does bring about the ability for a shivcha kananis to eat truma. And velochai shinan l'simphon. We're not worried that retroactively maybe we'll find out that really she wasn't a shivcha kananis, whatever the details are. There we're not concerned about it. So zu, a regular arusa, a regular bas Yisrael, shabiyasa ma'achilasa betruma, by her where the tashma shamita does work, then eino din shekaspa ma'achilasa betruma, all the more so that money should below nechush l'simphon. That should have been the svara, that we should have trusted them. So Yochanan ben Bagbag at the top of the page, again, Ravina's lens. Yochanan ben Bagbag was saying, how can you not be concerned about an Arusa Bas Yisrael? Maybe there's a simphon. Maybe there's something that's going to undo what she is. So he says back, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says back to him, you've got it all wrong. We're not worried about that at all. And this is the Kal V'chomer. So really, she should be allowed. And then as the Bryce at the top of the page continues, so it does over here. Last 2 lines. What do you want me to do? Top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Until she gets married. Mishum de'ula. Now, the reason over here why we had said that we have a rabbinic override, that mido raisa leis man depaleg. Everyone agrees that an arusa bas Yisrael when she is engaged, betrothed halachically, she's had Kiddushin arad mikudeshes to a Kohen, she's allowed to eat truma. But we have a rabbinic override. And this rabbinic override was framed in the name of Ula. And that is that we're afraid that this woman who's an Arusa, she's so excited. Oh my gosh, what a great guy. He's a Kohen. Look at this food I'm eating. It's wine from Truma. And she pours a cup for a family member. We're less concerned about that when they're married and living in the same house and the husband is around and he knows all the halachos of Truma better than she, because he's been a Kohen his whole life. She's been married to a Kohen for 10 minutes. So that's why the Gemara says, what it says. And then Uven Bagbag, how would Ben Bagbag have responded to this concern about the Kal V'chomer that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira framed? Let's remember our flow. Ben Bagbag wanted to know, hey, why is this Arusa Bas Yisrael, why is this working? What about Simphon? Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira responded, don't worry, I have a Kal V'chomer. And now the Gemara is saying, Ben Bagbag, what are you going to do with the Kal V'chomer? The Gemara says on the top line, Ben Bagbag, what would you do with the Kal V'chomer? Says the Gemara, Simphon be'avadim lesle. Categorically, he has no halachic concerns in regards to Simphon when it comes to avadim. Why not? So the Gemara articulates in details why it is that Ben Bagbag is just not concerned about Simphon, about these conflicting these negative indicators, these negative negating factors is the right language. Why is it that when it comes to avadim, that Ben Bagbag is not concerned about the negating factors? So says the Gemara, Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, second line, Imumin shebegaluihu. If the person has a blemish and it's public, everyone can see it. It's on his face, it's on his hands. I saw it, and I may be okay with that. And that's up to me. That's not up to you. I can see that. I don't have to worry about Simphon in regards to what's visible. And if he has a scar line on the middle of his upper back, and I'm never going to see it, on his thigh, I'm never going to see it, who cares? My nafka mine. What's the whole point of the evet? So again, what mumin are we talking about that are going to ruin the avdus of this person? You're going to say nimsa ganav kubiustus. You're going to say that maybe this evet that I purchased is a bit of a thief. He's a bit of a criminal. Yeah. He is. Everybody knows that. The Gemara says, Higio. That's absolutely true. Fourth line of Rashi. Higio, what does that mean, Higio? The word is a contextual word. It means he got there. It means I've already purchased him. I know that. Harehu shelo, destam eved ganevu. So even knowing that the guy's a ganev, I know he's a ganev. I purchased him with that assumption. So says the Gemara, my Amris, what else would you argue? Perhaps list him mizuyin, maybe he's an armed robber, o nichtav l'malchus, or perhaps he has a bounty on his head from the government. Nah, not worried about that. Hanhu kala isluhu, we would have known about that. So therefore, in this approach, Ben Bagbag says, I don't like your kal v'chomer of Yehuda ben Beseira. You wanted to say I shouldn't worry about Simphon from the world of Shivcha Kananis. No, by Avadim, there's no Simphon. You can't even start that argument. There is no kal v'chomer, and that is why they argue the way that they do. The Gemara says, "Michti bein lamar uvein lamar." Bein lamar uvein lamar lo achla. At the end of the day, lamaisa, everyone agrees that the Rusa Bas Yisrael doesn't eat. Now, Ben Bagbag for different reasons than for Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So says the Gemara, what's the difference between them? Ika benaihu kibel, mosar, v'halach. These are the three nafkamina cases between the two shitas of Yochanan ben Bagbag and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Without Rashi, as is usually the case, we'd be lost. So Rashi says 9 lines from the top of the page. Dibra Maskal Kibel. If Kibel alav es hamumen, if the guy accepted upon himself all of the mumen, so mishum simphon leka, and then your concerns about the person becoming a psul is irrelevant because I accepted all of their flaws. But mishum de'ula ika, but the concern about whether or not the Arusa Bas Yisrael will give it to her sister, her best friend, that taka is still a concern. So that would be an nafkamina. And the second Rashi that we're going to learn, Masar, deals with both words Masar and V'halach. In the Gemara, we have 3 cases, Kibel, Masar, V'halach. So it says the Gemara, Masar ha'av l'shluchei habal. If the messenger of the father, Masar ha'av l'shluchei habal, o shahalchu shluchei ha'av, im shluchei habal, v'oda baderech, if she's still traveling and the woman is with them on the way to getting married, mishum simphon ika, there are possibilities of simphon that she could be a psul, but mishum shematashke leka, because the leis nehula achiu la'achos gaba, she's walking down the road with no family around. So these are just gentle nafkaminas that the Gemara highlights between the shitas of Yochanan ben Bagbag and the shita of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So we spent an amud trying to analyze and figuring out that story. Lemaisa. The way it works out is that an Arusa Bas Yisrael is Mida Oraisa allowed to eat truma when she's engaged to a kohen, but halacha lemaisa doesn't matter. Halacha lemaisa, we're concerned either because of simphon or we're concerned because of ula. Whatever the case may be, when a woman gets engaged to a kohen, it is not all that it's cracked up to be in regards to being to accessing truma. We do not allow her to eat that truma. We had said in our Mishnah earlier that there's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in regards to the minimum amount of money that's required for kesef to function in regards to marriage. How much is a tabas? How much does it have to be? So Beis Shammai was of the opinion that it's a dinar, which is significantly more than a pruta. A pruta is a copper coin, a dinar is a silver coin. So our assumption is that that Beis Shammai is much more machmir, and he says, I should say machmir. Whatever the right language is. He has a higher threshold in order to get married. So we've discussed this case in our shiur many times, the case about the pencil in the hallway where a boy goes over to the girl and says, Hared mekudesh haslibi iparon zu. So l'chora, it's a shava pruta, but not a shava dinar. So that would be the type of thing that's an afkamina. It's hard to put dollar amounts on this. We're going to discuss this more in tomorrow morning's shiur. But let's continue anyways with the Gemara. A third of the way down, Yud Aleph Amar Aleph at the two dots. Beis Shammai, bekesef, Beis Shammai omrim bedinar. My taimai hu de Beis Shammai. Where does Beis Shammai get this idea that it needs to be a dinar? And by the way, Lamaisa, we paskin like Beis Hillel that it's a shava pruta. As we always talk about that in learning. Oh, it has to be a shava pruta. But again, we know that Beis Shammai has another shita. Where does he get it from? So we're going to see 4 approaches today, and then we're going to call it a day. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Zera, Sheken Isha Makpedes al Atzma, Vein Miskadshin Bepachos Midinar. This is like the modern self-esteem. You're worth more than a pruta. You're worth more. No one should treat you for less. A pruta really is inexpensive. A dinar is also l'chora not that expensive. And l'maisa, what the Gemara is saying is that a woman has her own set of standards. The Gemara questions this. What does this mean? A woman has her own set of standards. Amar le Abai elamayat. If that's true, his daughters, the kaptan and Avshayu, they're extremely prissy, wealthy. They're not going to handle this, even the dinar. They want way more money in the bank. These are talking about like gold bars. Like these are, you want to marry me? You're dropping some cash. So what about them? Says the Gemara, Hachanami. What about in a case like that? What about a girl like that from that kind of a family? She's from a very, very well-to-do family, and Lamaisa, her expectations are very high. Hachanami, would you say? Hachanami de lo habu Kiddushin? Even for the strict sheet of Beis Shammai, let's say they handed over a dinar to she wouldn't be married. It's completely subjective to the individual. My standard as a woman, I need to get $1 million in cash. If I accept $500,000 in cash, I'm not married because I set my own standard. It's completely subjective. No way. So says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down. Amarle, pashta yada v'kibla lo ka'amina. If you hand something to her and she accepts it, we're not talking about that because she accepted it. She looked at it. She could see it. What's the nafkamina? Ki kamina de kitcha balayla, when she can't see the actual coinage that's in her hand. Inami de shavya shliach, or if there was a shliach that was accepting it before her. What the Gemara is saying over here is pretty wild. She can set her own standard, and what that means is that when her standard is the tarkava de dinar, $1,000, whatever, a higher number. If she says you cannot be mekudeshes to, I will not be mekudeshes to you with that money, with $2,000 has to be 10,000. She could say that. She could say you can't purchase me for that. She could say that. She has every right to say that. But if she does accept it, then the minimum has to be a dinar. That's how the Gemara understands answer number 1 of Reb Zera. Let's move on to answer number 2. Rabbi Yosef Amar Tamad Beis Shammai Kid Rabbi Huda Amar Rav Asi. Amar Rabbi Huda Amar Basi called Kesef Amar Torah Kesef Tzuri. B'Shal Divrayim Kesef Medina. There are 2 types of Kesef. There's the Kesef of Tzuri, which the Mefarshim here explained the smallest unit of Kesef Tzuri is a dinar. So therefore, because they're getting married, the minimum shiur is the Kesef dinar. B'Shal Divrayim, when we deal with cases that are Dinei D'Rabbanan, rabbinic types of cases, then it's Kesef Medina. That's talking about like the copper coins, like the pruta, the shava pruta. So that would be the second possible answer, which is relatively simple. The Gemara is going to now take a tangent and analyze this line of Rabbi Huda Amar Rav Asi, because we'll see in a moment that there are a number of kashas against this assumption of Rav Yehuda Amar Rab that kol kesef Amar B'Torah's kesef tzuri, that it's always talking about dinarim. That's not simple. So we have 2 answers so far as to how Beis Shammai holds of a dinar instead of a pruta. What we're going to do now is dig into the assumption of Rabbi Yosef. Gufa. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Asi said, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Asi, he said, Kol kesef Amar B'Torah kesef tzuri v'shal divrayim kesef medina. Says the Gemara, Klalahu. Is that in fact a klal? that all of the times that the Torah speaks about kesef, it's talking about kesef tsuri. And remember, kesef tsuri is the coinage system where the lowest coin is a dinar, which is what Beis Shammai was utilizing for the sake of getting married. And you want to now say that really Beis Shammai is just using a broad rule that whenever we have a din doraisa, it's kesef tsuri. V'harei taina, there's a case scenario of a taina. Rashi, top of the page. Dibur masel v'harei taina. Sh'adam toines chavero. I go to Bezdin and I say, doctor, you owe me $5,000. Umashpianoso, and we make you, the doctor, take a shvua. That's whether or not he's going to admit. So that's our case in the Gemara. We have a case of taina. What does the pasuk say about this taina? The pasuk says, "Ki yitain isha re'ehu kesef o kelim lishmor." Utznan. What do we see? Shuas hadayanim hataina shtei kesef. What do you mean double? You just told me the rule that it's one kesef tsuri every time we talk about Dina Doraisa. Why is the pasuk talking about two? And the Brisa finishes there. We're talking about something else, another part of the Brisa. But the relevant part for our question, a question against Rabbi Yehuda Marab, which is how can you say that every case Midoraisa is talking about Kesef Tsuri, which is 1 unit, this is 2 units? That doesn't even make any sense. Says the Gemara, you're right, but there it's different because what did the pasuk say? The pasuk said 2 lines from the top, Kesef O Kalim. And says the Gemara, Hasam Dumya the Kalim. The money has to align with Kalim. Ma Kalim Shnayim, just like the word in the pasuk of Kalim is Shnayim, which is double, it's pluralized, it's larger. Af Kesef Shnayim. So therefore the Kesef Tsuri is doubled over here. So you don't have an argument from here. And similarly, Uma Kesef Dabar Chashuv, Av Kalim Dabar Chashuv, again, it's true, but it's just not related to our Gemara directly. So that was question number 1 against the principle of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, and we got out of the problem. Let's try again. The Gemara says with another question, 6 lines down on Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and we're going to be stopping at the 2 dots on the top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph at the last of the short lines, or the first of the long lines, more accurately. You want to say this principle that every time the Torah talks about kesef is kesef suri, the dinar type of money. That the money should be created in your hand. You should form the money. Vitnan. A person who's going to be changing out money from a sela, and there mimaos, that is a language of pruta. That's not a language of tsuri. That's not a language of kesef tsuri. Says the Gemara, don't worry, kesef. Ha kesef, but when the pasuk says ha kesef, it broadens. It's not just kesef tsur, it's even kesef medina. The third question, v'harei hektish, tichsiv v'nasana kesef v'kamlo v'amar Shmuel hektish shvei mana shechilu al shava pruta mechulal, copper coins. Again, kasha. You wanted to say that the klal is that every time the Torah says kesef, it's kesef tsuri. Yet here we see it's kesef medina. Samnami kesef yalet mi'maiser Rebbe Shava. Don't worry, we can broaden. We're not only talking about kesef tsuri, we're even talking about kesef medina. And then lastly, and this one's going to be the dagger, and we're going to then have to reinterpret what we had learned at the beginning of this sugya. The harei kiddushay isha. What about getting married? The pasuk says ki yikach ish isha uv Allah. The gamar kicha mistei Ephron. We know that kicha is a form. We've been discussing this for the last 10 blocks. That kicha mistei Ephron is the way that a woman gets married. Betnan. What does Beis Hillel say about this? Beis Hillel omrim bepruta uveshvei pruta. That's a din d'oraisa. If Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, if he's right to say that every time the Torah says money is talking about kesef tsuri and not kesef medina, well, the pruta is kesef medina. So how can Beis Hillel learn in our Mishnah that this is the case? It's backwards. Nema, would you say Ravasi to Amar Beis Shammai, that Ravasi, whose name was quoted at the bottom of Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, would you possibly even ever venture to say that he holds like Beis Shammai, that only Beis Shammai holds of kesef tsuri and Beis Hillel doesn't hold of kesef? It's not possible. We don't paskin like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai ain't a Mishnah. We don't even, it's not even Torah. His shitas don't even count. They're zeros. So it can't be that Ravasi holds that way. So therefore, the Gemara says you're 100% right. And the line that we learned at the beginning of this sugya, that every time we see the word kesef, it's talking about kesef tsuri, and every time we're talking about midrabanan, it's kesef medina. Says the Gemara, we need to now change gears. Third of the way down, Yud Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Elai itmar hachi itmar. This is the right way to understand that line of Rabbi Yehuda Amarav. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav Asi. Wait 1 second. Is that the way it was framed at the bottom of the page? Yeah, it's Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav Asi. Sorry. When we say in the name of Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav Asi, it says in the name of Rabbi Asi, Kol Kesef Katsuv HaAmar Batorah. Anytime the Torah is explicit with the amount that we're dealing with a specific shiur, then it's kesef tzuri. But if it's shel divreihem, if it's rabbinic money, under those circumstances, we will say that it's kesef medina. Oh, that answers all of our questions above. Problem solved. Says the Gemara, it does answer all of our questions above, but it doesn't answer all questions possible because we have one more. My kamashmal tanina. We have this in a brisa already. We don't need your help. This brisa can be found in Maseches Bechoros. Chamesh sloyin shel ben. The 5 coins that are used in a pidyon haben. Shloshim shel eved. The 30 that are used as a knas for an eved. The chamishim shel ones mafate. The 50 that's used for a knas of the ones and the mafate of a man who violates or seduces a woman. Mea shel motzi shemra. All of those money. Kulam b'shekel hakodesh b'manatzuri. You wanted to say that you corrected yourself in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Ravasi. You wanted to say every time that there's a specific shiur, and every time it says that there's an exact amount of money that's kesef tzuri. I have a brisa that says that already. I don't need an amora to come later after the brisas and catch up. You're behind. You're behind. The brisa already told me there's specific chamesh, shloshim, chamishim, mea. We have all of it already. And look what it says. It says kesef tzuri. Rabbi Yehuda Ravasi comes 200 years later and he decides to add a memra. You're late to the party. Says the Gemara, no. You're absolutely right in regards to kesef tzuri that was already implied and stated explicitly in this brisa. What was missing? The shel divreim kesef medina itzrichule delotnan. The part that was missing, what Rabbi Yehuda Ravasi was adding, was the second half of his statement. You're right. We knew from the brisa already, way before Rabbi Yehuda Ravasi, that if there's a fixed amount of money, it's kesef tzuri. What we didn't know is that if it was midivrehem, that it would be kesef medina. Ditanya. The Gemara presents a case 2/3 of the way down. Hatokea lechavero. Rashi, what's hatokea lechavero? We would have thought it had to do with a shofar. That's mostly because we're amaratzim. So take a look at Rashi. Halfway through the wide lines toward the bottom, 15 lines from the bottom. Dibra maschel hatokea lechavero. Be'ozno. Lashon Rabbeinu Halevi. We're talking about his ear. Rabbeinu Azaken lamadnu shehiku be'ozen shehiku eitzel ha'ozen. He smacked him on the side of the head and he hurt his ear. Back in the Gemara. Hatokea lechavero. No saying lo sela. He pays him a coin. Says the Gemara, the lo tema my sela arba zuze. Don't say that this sela is talking about arba zuze, which is a language of talking about tzuri. That's not correct. Elamai sela palga de zuze, half a zuz, which is the language of kesef medina. De avidi inshi de karu la palga de zuza istira. Anyways, lemaisa, the Gemara concludes like this. What did Rabbi Yehuda Ravasi add? What he was saying is that when we have a fixed amount of money in Chumash, then we are always talking about Kesef Tzuri. We really didn't need him for that. We had the Brisa. His Chiddush was in regards to Dibrahim, that when we're dealing with Dinei Derabanan, like the case of hitting him on the Ozen, we're talking about Kesef Medina. That's the language of Pruta. Now let's go back to our previous conversation, which is trying to understand Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai was of the opinion that we have a higher standard, a higher threshold for Kiddushin, that it is not Shava Pruta like Beis Hillel, but rather Shava Dinar. We learned 2 answers already. These 2 answers are found on the bottom of Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph. We learned the answer of that women are makbid on themselves, and we learned the answer of Kesef Tzuri, which is Torah language, and therefore it should be a dinar. Here's answer number 3. 8-9 lines from the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Omer, Ta'amayhu de Beis Shammai kidechizkiya. The reason why Beis Shammai is of the opinion that we hold that Kiddushin's threshold is going to be a dinar. Why is that? Amar Chizkiya Amar Kra behefta. We need to help her get removed. What is this talking about? An Amma Ivriya whose Baal doesn't want to marry her. That he does this like a sliding scale. Oh, I'm going to own you for 6 years, and I pay $600, $100 a year. You've been with me for 2 years, $400 left. I'm going to help reduce the cost. I'm going to help to get you free. So says the Gemara. If you want to say that we have to give her a dinarim, that makes sense. I could understand. We're reducing her payment until she's all the way at the bottom, and then she can go free. If you want to say that we're giving her a pruta and not a dinar, the problem is that the pruta is the bottom of the food chain. Mi pruta, mi megara. You can't get, it's lower than a penny. How do you get lower than a penny? So if it's a pruta as the minimum kinyan, there's no way to break that down. If there's no way to break down that payment, then what does the pasuk mean when it says v'havta? You need to help her lower her payments. There's nothing to lower. A penny is the smallest, it's agurot. Didn't they used to have individual agurot? They had the tens pieces. They used to have smaller ones. Maybe, yeah. They used to have even smaller ones. Whatever the smallest one is, in our currency, it's a penny. That's it. That's it. But if you say that an Ama Ivri is nicknamed B'Shava Pruta, so then the pasuk of Vehefta makes no sense. What is V'Shava? How are you Vehefta? How do you lower that cost? You can't make it prorated. It's impossible. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kamara Rachmana, Hecha de Yavla dinar tigra ad pruta. Hecha de Yavla pruta lo tigra klau. It just means whatever the denominations are. Yes, if we can break it down, we shall. And if we can't, we won't. Says the Gemara, top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, lo salka daitach. You cannot say that because dumya de Yud. It has to be similar to Yud. Yud is the language of marriage between a Baal and an Ama Ivriya, not a normal marriage. It's a language of appointment to one another. Ma Yud, just like in regards to Yud. Afal Gab the Iboy Miyad, the Iboy Lo Miyad. He can choose to marry her, whatever he wants. Kol Hecha de Lo Mati Miyad. But if it's impossible for the person to marry them, we'll discuss this in a moment. Lo Havu Zvina Zvine, then it would not work. Namely, let's say that I own an Ama Ivriya, and my son wants to buy the Ama Ivriya. So my son is not allowed to marry this person because she's been with me. So therefore, there's no marriage. Hachanami kol hecha de lo matzi megara. Here too, we should argue that if the minimum is a shava pruta, and I can't make it prorated, it's the smallest denomination, it's the smallest coin. Lo havu zvina. So says the Gemara. Perhaps I would have thought that was a zero. Says the Gemara. The kiddushin isha lebeis Shammai nafka lehume ama ivriya. The kiddushin isha of a woman comes from an ama ivriya. Remember our question: where does Beis Shammai learn a shvei dinar from? Says the Gemara, Ma ama ivriya bepruta lo mekanya, af isha bepruta lo mekadsha. So sophisticated. What a heavy answer. And the Gemara basically says that just like by ama ivriya, a pruta doesn't work, because if a pruta worked, we wouldn't understand the pasuk of behefta. Therefore, it must be that an ama ivriya cannot marry with pachos mishava pruta. With a pruta at all, it has to be a dinar. It has to be the coin that has other coins under it, because otherwise the pasuk of behefta doesn't make any sense. Therefore, af isha bepruta lo mekacha. The Gemara asks on the 6 lines down in Yud Beis Amud Aleph, ve'ema bepalga de dinar, ve'ema shtei prutos. Why do we have to go all the way up to a dinar? If Beis Shammai is simply concerned that we need a way to break down the money, then don't make it into a full dinar, make it a half a dinar, make it shtei prutos, so we could say, oh, you're 2 prutos, great, we'll prorate, we'll break it in half. That fulfills the pasuk of behefta, that the husband is then able to break down that Ama Ivriya's contract and get her out earlier. We can use the word behefta. Why is it that we went a full coin up from pruta to dinar? What about a half dinar? What about 2 prutos? The Gemara says, no, kevan de apikte mi pruta. Once Beis Shammai learned that a pruta wasn't shaveh, ukma adinar. We go up to the next coin. We're not splitting hairs. This is already splitting hairs. We're not splitting hairs any more than that. That's answer number 3. And again, to review, why is it that Beis Shammai holds that the threshold for Kiddushin is a dinar, not a pruta? And here, answer number 3 is because we learn from the world of Ama Ivriya. Just like an Ama Ivriya cannot be nicknamed Kiddushin, she can't be nicknamed Shava Pruta because it's too small. And she then bumps up to dinar. So too, the same exact thing is true for an Isha. Rava Amar, and Rava's answer is... this was pretty convincing too, but Rava's answer is also pretty convincing. Hainu taima de Beis Shammai shelo yehu benos Yisrael kehefker. It's very easy to take a shava pruta. Look here, I found a marker on the table. This is a shava pruta, and it's easy to make things kehefker if all that we're doing is taking a shava pruta, walking over to a woman and saying Harad Mekudesh Moshe, the fluorescent markers Zukadas Moshe Yisrael, and she's halachically married. The bar is too low. That's a good svara too, by the way. But Beis Shammai is not the one we paskin like. So it would be the case, had we paskin like Beis Shammai, that we would say, and we hear the svara, it is dangerously low level. Again, we're a much more affluent culture. Even they say by Rabbi Chanan Wasserman that when they would get honey, it was such a geschmack, they would a little bit on the kid's tongue, write these stories about him. We buy honey in these massive jars. We can't compare to the affluent. And I'm not saying it should influence halacha, but I am explaining as to why it is not necessarily the same in our culture. It's worse in our culture because we're so affluent. We throw things away all the time that are worth a shava pruta. We do that all the time. We just did a purge in our closets. We threw away well-worn clothes, but all of them were shava pruta, way more than shava pruta. Fine. So we're going to stop right here. These are the 4 answers as to why Beis Shammai holds that marriage between a man and a woman has to be a higher threshold of a dinar. Wishing you all a beautiful day.